All right. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us. I'm Jen Schonger from the New Jersey Autism Center of Excellence, the NJACE, which is funded in part by the New Jersey Governor's Council and the New Jersey Department of Health. I'm very happy to be here today with Natalie Kitts and Dr. Faith Thayer of Positive Development. But before I introduce them, I'll go over our usual housekeeping notes. We are live on YouTube right now. The recording will be available to watch at any time after we air, and we'll have both Spanish and English captions as well as a transcript. We encourage you to ask questions or comment. Just remember that in order to do so, you have to be logged into your YouTube account. And as always, we would love to know more about you. So if you're comfortable, please feel free to let us know a little about yourself in the chat. So now it is my pleasure to introduce our guests today. First up, we have Natalie Kitts, who is the clinical director at Positive Development. Natalie is passionate about using scientific evidence-based approaches to help kids, families, and adults live well-balanced lives. She holds a bachelor's degree in psychology and a master's of science in occupational therapy from Kane University. As a licensed occupational therapist, she has expertise working in early intervention, school-based practice, autism, parent coaching, and private practice. She's a lifelong learner and has extensive continuing education, including advanced training in sensory integration theory and STAR SI advanced proficiency, and has earned a trainer certificate in the DIR FCD. Welcome, Natalie.
Thank you.
And then we also have Dr. Faith Thayer, who's the lead mental health therapist at Positive Development. She's an expert training leader and DIR floor time provider, licensed professional counselor, registered board certified art therapist, and licensed creative arts therapist. She lectures in the School of Psychology and Counseling at Caldwell University. She was an assistant professor in the graduate program of special education at Damon College, TTI. Previous positions include Director of Student Programming at the Atlas Foundation for Autism, Director of Mental Health and DIR Floor Time at the Imagine Academy for Autism, and Director of the Creative Arts Therapy Center and overnight camps for the Connecticut Institute for the Blind in Oak Hill. She's the lead author of the recently published study and evaluation of a developmental individual differences relationship-based creative arts therapies program for children with autism. And we can probably link to that. Is that available, Faith?
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. So we'll add that to the show notes when this is all set. So welcome to both of you. I'm going to go off camera for now, and then I'll come back whenever you want me, and then for the Q&A. Thanks so much.
Thank you. So let's see. Okay. So we're truly honored to be here today and to share about the DIR model. We're both clinicians, as Jen had introduced us, but we also both have personal experience with the DIR model, and that really has brought us to a place where we know it works, and we are truly passionate about making it available for all families who could benefit from using this approach. So today, we really hope to demystify what it means to follow a child's lead. We want to take you on a journey from theory to practice, and we will briefly explore the differences between behavioral interventions and using a DIR approach. And then we're going to explain to you the DIR model, the history, the evidence, how to implement it, the theory, and then how to use a person-centered interactive approach for time to connect. But really the number one reason we're here today is that we truly believe that there are different families, and we live in a time that we really need to embrace that there's different cultures and different lifestyles and different values. And with that being said, children with autism should have an option of different approaches. So when we think about children with autism, we really think about that we want to do anything we can to help them reach their potential, right? But in order to do that, we have to just ask ourselves a few questions. And in that, thinking about the child, we're going to say, well, what's the child and the family struggling with, right? So some children, may have neuro differences, but they don't necessarily need support, and they're not struggling with anything, so they're not going to be coming to us for therapies. But other children are going to have characteristics that really get in the way of their development. So there are a few things that we really think about when we think about children with autism, and one is, are there individual differences that are interfering with what's important to their family, right? And we're going to take you today through a journey with a few kiddos. The first one that I'm thinking about is Brian, and he's a 4-year-old little boy who is he's struggling with some things, but he's very, very interested in others. He has high energy and he's always running around. He does have poor safety awareness, and he has difficulty following directions. He can't quite follow rules. He's in preschool, but he's at risk of being thrown out. His parents are constantly being called in for him hitting other children on the playground. He's gotten in a tendency, he's biting others now. So he's really struggling. And what we want to do is take a look at his journey as we go through and determine, what things might be getting in the way and causing some of these challenges.
And I would love to also introduce you to Kayla. Kayla is, again, another 4-year-old. Comes to parents' chief complaints is child is withdrawn. They're concerned that she doesn't have interest in the world around her. They're seeing meltdowns of imploding, of weeping when things are going out of rigid patterns. What we're finding too is she comes into clinic, goes straight to the bucket of toys, pulls out our Hot Wheels, plops down, and spins the wheels. She's focused on the wheels. When adult tries to engage, she doesn't turn or redirect to sound. However, mom reports when she does hold Kayla and rock Kayla and sing to Kayla, she can get her to engage.
So Brian and Kayla have a combination of strengths and challenges. So it's this combination of strengths and challenges that's part of really the human condition, right? I have strengths and challenges. You have strengths and challenges, right? We all do. But it's really identifying, are some of these challenges really interfering with this child's development, and being able to identify what those challenges are is really what our role is. That's what we're, the first thing we want to do. And then, from there, we're going to start to determine what's the right intervention, right? So we want to start to think about what interventions are available for this child and what might be the right thing to help meet this child's needs.
Okay, so for Kayla and Brian, right now, what are the options? We have the behavioral approach versus the developmental approach. We have crossover with the two approaches. They are both evidence-based, data-driven. There's some overlap on certain skill sets we're working on, motor, communication, but there are some large differences where we see the behavioral approach is much more structured, developmental is semi-structured. Developmental, we're looking for intrinsic motivation. Behavioral is looking for external motivation.
So one of the things we're going to talk about as we go on, and I'm sure everybody's heard that the behavioral approach is evidence-based. But when we think about evidence and we think about research, I want you to look at the two approaches side by side and really think about when you measure something. When we have a very stringent measuring tool, it's a lot easier to measure. If we're measuring something that's structured, it's going to be straightforward, right? If I'm measuring, does this child know their ABCs? There's no gray areas about it, right? They can identify the A, they can identify B, that's clear cut and easy to measure. It's not so easy to measure. It's something that's dynamic, like a social engagement, or where this child's play level is. And then that might change from moment to moment, and it might change from the activity and the person that they're interacting with. So it's really important to think about these two approaches side by side and understand that it's very different to measure the two different approaches. But then when we think about, is the whole slide up, or is it going to unfold? Faith, can you see everything where it says behavior and the whole thing?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah,
All right. Sorry.
good.
Because
No,
I actually have it set to as a click, but it looks like it's the whole thing.
Right.
So I just want to make
Yeah.
sure you're seeing the same thing I'm seeing. All right. So when we think about, what we were just comparing the side by side, the behavioral and the developmental approach, we always think about the iceberg, right? And we think about the behavior is really the very top of the iceberg. It's what we see. It's what's easy to identify, because it's the most prevalent thing that's in front of us. But below the iceberg is where, we start to see the things that we don't always see, and we have to, sometimes we infer. And I just had this conversation actually yesterday with, with somebody who's in training to become a DIR clinician, and they were pointing out that, well, frequently the things that are below the surface might be, the things that would show up in an FBA, like seeking attention or avoiding something, or I can't even remember some of the other things. But when we look at the first layer underneath the behavioral, there are some things that might be, yes, maybe that child is seeking attention. Maybe most frequently what we see, they might be trying to gain something, right? So Brian, the little guy that I introduced before, when he's at the playground, he's really trying to gain control over the toys that he's playing with. And when he's playing with his truck, he doesn't want anybody coming near his truck, and he gets really, really upset when somebody, comes near his truck. So what I say, he is gaining control. He's trying to control his environment, but I'm going to wonder why. And I'm going to wonder, what's deeper and what's below that why? What's happening within Brian that he is so controlling over those toys? And what's happening within Brian that, when the child comes close enough to him that, he pushes them away? We really do want to keep looking. And then, as we go through this, we're going to say, all right, well, there is a lot of motor planning challenges, and there are sensory sensitivities, and there's some speech challenges that he's having. And we're going to look at this a little bit more as we go, but I really want us to understand we can continue to go deeper until we really get to the core challenge. I think, did we have any examples?
Absolutely. So if we're thinking about the behavior, the external as the communication, it's communicating something to us, everything above the iceberg. So above the iceberg for Kayla, what are the chief complaints of the parent? She's withdrawn, and we're seeing that rigidity. But in reality, what are the cars? What are the spinning of the wheels?
So, and that's a really good point, because when we think about Kayla's individual differences, one of the things I noticed when she was in the clinic was that she sits in this W sit, right? So, and we all, any of the clinicians know, no, we can't sit in the W sit. It's bad for your hips, and it's a sign of poor posture. So then, somebody, come up, or actually in this situation, mom came up and she was fixing her legs, and she was like, no, we can't sit this way. And that's a way to address the problem, right? That the problem we see is that Kayla was sitting in a W sit. So as a clinician who's digging deeper, I start to wonder, I wonder why Kayla picks up the car, holds it in front of her, has her arms right next to her body, and starts spinning the wheels. And I wonder how her posture is interfering with her ability to shift her vision and look from one thing to another. So these wonders continue to happen as we meet and work with these children, and really to start to explore the invisible and go much deeper than just the visible.
Now, I just want to add one thing when we're looking at this iceberg. So if we're looking at full development for us, even as adults, if we don't go to the root or the cause of the external behavior, it's always going to come back up. It's just going to manifest in a different way. So we really need to go under and holistically look at what is causing it to burst above.
For sure. If you go to the doctors and you have a fever and they tell you to take Advil, They're like, you know what, you have a fever, take some Advil. And then you go home and 3 days later, you still have a fever. Likely that there's something that's causing that fever, right? And we need to get to that root cause of, most likely an infection. And, and then we're going to address the root cause, and then the fever is going to go away. Right. So we don't just keep saying, oh, we keep taking more Advil, come on, go take some more Advil. It's going to get the fever to go away, because it's only really addressing what we see. And we really do have to be careful when we're just addressing what we see. So the developmental model, and I'm not sure how many of you are familiar with DIR, but I'm just going to give a snapshot here of what we have in the middle is the individual differences, right? So when we think about DIR, the I is the individual differences piece. The D is the developmental, it's our map. It's the roadmap that helps us understand where this child is at and what comes next, right? It helps us understand, developmentally, what can this child handle, and what are they ready to learn, and what is offline, right? What's derailing them. And frequently it's those individual differences that are causing that child to get derailed. And we need to go back and say, all right, well, what did we miss, or what's getting in the way? Just like with Brian and Kayla, there's things that are underneath the iceberg that we really want to pinpoint. But ultimately, none of that can be done without relationships. Right. So I can sit down and work on skills, and I can identify, what, Kayla really has some trouble with posture. And if I just sit there and have her come into the clinic, and for 45 minutes, I'm working on getting her posture to be upright, but I'm not working on any of the other pieces of her development, and I'm not working on the engagement with her caregivers, or getting her to pay attention to other people in the environment, then I'm going to be missing really the motivation for human interactions, right? I mean, we're all motivated to be connected and interact with others. That's what drives us, right? I mean, we feel calm and we feel connected when we've engaged with another person. And it's that engagement and that regulation that comes from co-regulation, and that all comes from the relationships that within our lives. So we really have to start to think about what drives human development, and through the ages, it's always been relationship. It's not a new thing.
Okay, so DIR we actually first see in the literature with Dr. Greenspan and Dr. Weir in the 70s. But the study of healthy human development has been around since Piaget. This is not new. What is new for DIR is the amount of evidence-based research that has recently come out, that has opened the doors for families to finally have choice and have the opportunity to access it. Just to highlight here, a couple of the larger scales studies that came out, Solomon with the Play Project. This was a large randomized control study where they actually found via the developmental intervention that there was a decrease in autism severity rating, as well as a decrease in parent stress and depression levels. Another I would like to highlight is Sandbank and the Project AIM. Project AIM was a massive meta-analysis that actually found that specifically developmental naturalistic interventions had meaningful effect size on individuals' social communication. Really exciting things coming out. And just to zoom in, some others, I just mentioned Play Project, but the Merit model, as well as Project Impact, as well as Play Project, focus on social emotional capacity development. So from there, what we actually see is the external outcomes of such things as child's reduction of anxiety and stress, but also global social communication and overall quality of life for the family unit.
So understanding the DIR model is a very small piece of what we're here to share about today, right? So we really want to think about one of the things that comes up frequently when we talk to people is that it's complicated, right? DIR is it seems like a theory, and it doesn't seem understandable to many people how to actually bring this into practice. And this is really what we want to share with you today. We want to talk about, just some examples of what it's going to look like from beginning to end, right? So that at the very beginning of our intervention, we're really thinking about the family, right? And we're thinking about what's important to the family. And we have, we keep the family at the center, right? And we want to build connections, and we want to shape futures. And we really want to support them in becoming the experts in their child, right? And it starts with, in an interview and getting to know what's important to the family. And from there, we start to do our evaluations.
Okay, and so with positive development intervention, we do a holistic approach to assessments. So we don't just do one. We really we utilize standardized assessments such as the Byland to give us a global picture of the child's overall functioning. We utilize the FEAS to support and give us the foundational baseline of the child's functional emotional development. We also use the CARS to utilize for autism symptomology. And then we utilize the parent stress index for us to get a baseline of where mom, dad, or primary caregiver is in relation to their child.
And so this starts to give us a bigger picture and more understanding of, how we can support this family. But ultimately, we need to understand the child's developmental levels, right? So without understanding a child's developmental levels, our intervention is not going to be effective, right? If I'm not working where a child is ready, and when I think about the just right fit, right? As far as, I've got an activity that's going to be challenging, but not too challenging, right? If I give my 3-year-olds, or if I give a 3-year-old the keys to the car, they have no underlying skills to be able to do that, right? That they're not even in that realm. But if I give the 3-year-olds, a crayon and a piece of paper, the expectations are realistic, right? So the 3-year-old is going to be able to, maybe draw a circle, or maybe, do some scribbles. But when my intervention is specifically directed and understanding where this child is developmentally, then I can start gearing and thinking about that. So like when we were talking about Brian and Brian's challenges in preschool, a level 4 child is going to be able to do some shared problem solving, right? So a child who is working at that level, he's going to be able to say, that's my toy. I don't want you to play with it. Don't touch it, right? So I have an idea. I've kept that idea in my mind, and now I've expressed that to you, and I feel comfortable to be able to do that. But for Brian, somebody else comes into his space, and he is now dysregulated, and he is now, his body is feeling stressed. So he is no longer able to stay calm. So he's not able to access the thinking part of his brain. And what does he do when he can't access the thinking part of his brain? And he's worried about somebody taking his toy. He turns around and he pushes him, right? Because he's not thinking it through. But then if I come in as the adult and say, oh, Brian, that's not right. We don't push our friends. I've addressed the problem. I've addressed the top of the iceberg. And I've said, okay, the problem is Brian is pushing. But if I've used the developmental approach and I start to understand that when Brian gets stressed, he's no longer able to stay calm, then I'm going to say, the first thing I'm going to do is we'll say, how do we keep Brian in a state that he stays calm for longer periods of time? And then when a stressor occurs, he's able to respond to that stressor in an age appropriate way.
Absolutely. And if we think about Kayla, when we were talking about the developmental levels, Kayla's really, really struggling with the level 1, staying regulated, staying calm in her body. And for Kayla, it's twofold. One, she really doesn't have a fully realized level 5. So she's that abstract, that symbolic, that expectation. She's dependent on those routines. This is what keeps her safe. This is what keeps her having some control of her environment. But the other fold is her body. She can't depend on her own body to do what she wants and expects it to. So we're finding ourselves having emotional and physical dysregulation because of both of these.
Well, and one of the things you pointed out earlier is when mom sings to her, she's calmer, right? So, but also when mom sings to her, she picks her up and she holds her, right? And when mom is picking up her and holding her, she's supporting her body. And now Kayla can access her movement, right? And now Kayla's turning to mom. And now she's paying attention to mom. And now we're seeing connection. But that's because we've answered to the challenge, the motor challenge that was keeping her dysregulated, because she wants it. Again, we have that drive for human connection, right? She has that drive. It's not that it's not within her. Just because she has autism doesn't mean that she doesn't want to connect. Autism is a contributing factor, and then she has all these other underlying challenges, but she wants to connect with mom. So as DIR clinicians, we understand, and we say, okay, motorically, there's a challenge. Sensorially, there's a challenge, right? When there's a lot of things going on, we see more and more. Kayla's picking up these toys and holding them and focusing and right in front of her, because the outside world, things are moving. She can't shift to watch them. Her eyes aren't pairing with her body movement as we would expect for a typical 4-year-old. So she's protecting herself, and therefore she's staying in a much lower level until we respond to some of those challenges, and then we see more development, right? When we give her that just right challenge, we see that she's much more capable.
And you bring up something so important about her stress state, and keeping in mind that this child is in a hyper fight, flight, or freeze state for prolonged much periods of time because of all these factors. Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah. So, and as we think about, as we do all of those assessments, at the goal ultimately is to understand the child's individual profile, right? So we're looking at those individual differences that will contribute to either challenges or strengths. And we really want to pinpoint the examples, and the example of when Brian is his sensory system is just right. Brian does really well in a small room. When I take Brian into the gym, he's all over the place. I can't get him connected. His regulation is very, very poor. So one of the challenges for Brian is that when there's a lot of things, his mind is going from one thing to another, and he just sees something and goes to it, and then he sees something else and goes to it. And from working with him, I've found that he actually is adapting his posture by moving, because when he's still, it's a lot harder for him to control his movements, right? You have to have slower, segmented movements. You have to be able to sequence your actions when you're motor planning. And for Brian, a big open area is the opposite of what he needs, right? So then I take him into a smaller room where there's less distractions, and now I'm seeing his strengths. And now I'm seeing Brian able to, to climb over something and then come back to the beginning. And now he's gone through a 3-sequence of movements and actions because the environment has been adapted and modified. When we start to work with the child, we really do, as we had said, we want to find that just right challenge, but we also want to know what's too high, right? So, I think about having a baseline and really understanding how that contributes to behaviors. When I think about theory of mind, and I think about Brian as a 4-year-old or Kayla as a 4-year-old, being able to take somebody else's perspective, right? To be able to say, okay, well, this is how this other child is feeling. They have a lot of other things before that, right? So they need to be able to make choices. Can Brian in the moment understand that he has a choice, that he could pick up his car and move to another place? Or is he feeling panicked in his body that he's in a fight or flight state and he's not accessing the thinking part to be able to make choices? Does he have the self-control? Is he able to actually, think about what actions he can take? And in order to have that self-control, you really need to be able to hold an idea in your mind, right? So that's a developmental step that I have to be able to say, okay, this has happened in the past. And now I see what's happening now. I'm going to hold on to what happened in the past and then make a decision about what I'm going to do because I don't want to get into trouble. If the child isn't there yet and we have that expectation, then we're going to be putting an expectation, right? He might be motivated to be able to, to play with the other children. And I think about this with the behavioral approaches, the teacher, when the teachers were telling the parents what they were doing, they said, he knows that if he hits somebody, he's not going to get to have his favorite Play-Doh activity when they go back inside. Well, that takes a lot of putting the pieces together in the moment to be able to do that, right? And then he's motivated, he wants it, and then he goes inside and the teacher say, that you hit somebody so you don't get the Play-Doh, but the motivation might not have been enough, right? And I like to tell a story about when we're frustrated because we don't have the abilities that, sometimes it makes things worse, right? So if you would come into the room and said, what, Natalie, I'm going to give you this $100 if you read this paragraph. And I'm totally motivated. I'm like, all right, what? I wanted to go shopping after work. I'm ready to go. Give me the paragraph. So I'm motivated. I'm interested. You hand me the paragraph and it's written in Chinese. I don't have the skills. I don't have the ability. I don't have the underlying skills. I can't do it. But if you keep waving that $100 in front of me and saying, come on, Natalie, do it. We really need you to do this now. You really need to try harder. It's really not going to help me, and it's going to create frustration. What will help is if somebody sat down next to me and maybe, showed me one character. It might take time and it might take more effort, but I might at least be more engaged. I might stay with it. And if somebody else is sitting with me and supporting me through that process, I'm going to be more interested in learning, right? So then that's where that co-regulation and that relationship comes in.
Natalie, that was amazing. Can I stop you for 1 second to adjust the slides because people are having trouble reading them, I think because we have it minimized. Okay. Thanks for bearing with us, everybody. We adjusted this slide, so hopefully everyone can see them better now. While we were waiting, I was talking about this with Faith and Natalie, and I just wanted to add this as well, because such a key point of this is that theory of mind goes both ways. And so many of us who are not on the spectrum or don't have a disability have trouble reading and understanding the thoughts and perspectives and feelings of people, that we're trying to help. And we can't do that because that is actually causing damage to people, long-term damage from being misunderstood, not having their needs met. And so I love the way that everything was laid out here, because the whole point of this is that we're centering the child and the child's experience. And it's, yes, we have goals to support their development and to provide them with, tools and supports that will help them have an easier time, and help them connect with people. But we're doing it in a way that centers the child and that is meeting them where they are, not forcing them to look or act a certain way, but instead honoring their state. And if I'll throw in one more thing here, is because you were talking about this before. We know that people who are on the spectrum overwhelmingly have higher baseline heart rates and experience a higher baseline of stress. Dr. Torres has done research, and we know that their resting state was like a neurotypical person in pain. So if you think of that as a starting point, and these, when parents are experiencing the stress, it's actually because the child is stressed. The child is experiencing stress. So the parent, and we talked about this months ago with Dr. Clarissa Kripke, when the parents come with stress, that's a caregiver complaint. And that's a really important distinction, because we might say, okay, well, this is difficult because my child is doing X, but that's the parent's complaint. So what's the actual, what's the actual problem that the child is experiencing? And then how do you support that child? So I will go back off screen now.
We're actually, you set the stage beautifully, because we're going to build upon that a little bit in a few slides. So I love that you pointed that out.
Okay, perfect. I'll be back.
And it's just that it's such key things you're saying there, with the honor and respect, in order to develop a sense of self for all of us. And we all deserve it.
Absolutely. And ultimately, and that's why in our model and DIR in general is the family is in the center, right? And it's, we talk about the family and we talk about the caregivers. We don't talk about just the child, right? Because the child isn't operating in a bubble. And just, we're just going to talk really quickly about this one, because I think we have a lot of really other important things we want to touch upon.
Sure thing. So with the positive development model, it's a team. It's a transdisciplinary team approach, with, of course, the child and the parents in the center. And we all work together to support them the best way we can. On this team is a mental health clinician, a speech therapist, an occupational therapist, a parent educator. So really taking the space for the parent to become empowered so that they can do their own DIR without us and need us for less periods of time. A care coordinator to help coordinate this massive team, and then a developmental client coach to come in and support in the home to provide additional sessions to the child and the family.
And one of the things that, Jen had pointed out was recognizing that, the child's needs. But as we think about, the team and how important it is for our team to work together, right? Because we can't create an individual profile without working in this transdisciplinary team. So that means, me as an occupational therapist, I totally understand, the body, and I understand, some of the pieces. But then when I think about biology, yeah, sometimes I need to, depend upon, the mental health practitioner who's going to really be able to help me understand that emotional component and how those emotions are interacting with their physical components, right? And now we have a whole field of that called interoception, right? But it's not just one component by itself, and all of the team works together, and as it should, right? As every family should not be splintered by the therapies that are being offered to them. One of the things that I find so disturbing is when there's one clinician, they're like, I can do everything. And then it makes me wonder, well, what's being left out, right? Or which pieces, aren't being addressed because, you've chosen to be that one person who knows everything. And this is just, us recognizing that, using this intervention really ultimately is going to decrease parents' dependence on services. And that's our goal, right? That should be everybody's goal, is we want to decrease the dependence on services by increasing their efficacy and by increasing the child's ability to handle stressors. So ultimately, all of this starts with clinical reasoning, right? So we use the clinical reasoning as a team to really help families become more attuned and to be able to have more positive, productive interactions. And this is what we wish therapy looked like. So we talked about, our goal for coming together was to be able to provide you with strategies and to be able to help people understand what using a developmental approach looks like, right? And this is beautifully linear. And it starts with, prepping the environment and waiting for the child waiting ourselves before we interact with the child, and then going to the place where we can start joining and interacting with the child, and then ultimately building and expanding on what that child is able to do. And then at the end of, every interaction and session, the reflection piece, right? That's really what drives good therapy and, any good interaction, right? After I've had a positive interaction with, a loved one, a spouse, a friend, I'll reflect and say, what, that was good because, or, oh, that kind of went off kilter because. So this is really what we would love it to look like. Doesn't look like this. It's very messy. And this is more on what Jen was just talking about, that we have the child in the center, right? And the child is the center of the approach. But if we look outside, these are the things that we ask to be modified. The interactions are what gets modified. The environment gets modified. The activity gets modified. It's not, the child will be more available because they'll feel safe, they'll feel calmer, they'll feel more connected, and they'll feel more interested, engaging, and playing with us because of the things that we've done and modified. The optimal level of arousal is what Jen was just talking about with, understanding that children with autism frequently struggle with finding the optimal level of arousal, right? So that optimal level of arousal means being at that just right calm state. So we, as the adults interacting with the child, can modify the corners of this triangle to support that child staying in that optimum level of arousal. And then the things on the side here are the observable signs. And those are the things that we modify in the moment, right? So we can watch the child's face. We can see their eyes. When I saw Brian on the playground and I was observing him, and it was one of the other children were coming across the bridge, I could see his body and his shoulders raised and his body tensed and his arms came up in guard. There was signs that things were uncomfortable for him. And that was the point where, as the adults, instead of waiting and saying, okay, let's see what happens. Let's see if he can use his self-control. I already know that, he's struggling, right? I'm seeing the physical signs that his body is sharing that something is difficult for him. So as the adult, I can come in and I can modify that interaction now. I can modify the environment. I can come support him. One of the first things I say is when a child is stressed out, I'm going to come down in front of them. I'm going to no longer be this looming threat above them when they're already not quite sure how to adapt themselves in the world. And I'm going to come down in front of them where I can be a safe, interactive person. And I've just modified the environment and the interaction all in one move where I'm coming down. Now I might start speaking slower. Right? So I might start modifying some of my own interactions to be able to support him, but not to say, okay, this is the expectation, because that, as Jen had so eloquently said, that just frustrates our children, and that really leaves trauma because we're putting an expectation on them they just don't have yet, right? But we can help that emerge through our engagement and our interactions. So ultimately, after utilizing the DIR model, after learning the child's individual differences, and after lots and lots of practice, families feel competent. Families feel more able and to handle stresses, and they're resilient, and they have stronger connections. And that's ultimately, what we all want for children with autism and their families. So we're going to go through just a few, I know we've kind of gone through a lot of different things, but we're going to talk a little bit more about Brian and Kayla, and we're going to do it, in this interactive way where we can really think about, what some of the problems we're seeing are and how we might address them, and how we might be able to help these kiddos using some of these approaches. So as we said before, Brian has trouble going any place. His parents are concerned that he can't go on outings. They continue to try to motivate him to behave properly, and things don't seem to be working. So as a team, we come together and we look at all of these pieces. We look at the sensory pieces for Brian and for Kayla. What's going on emotionally, right? Brian's had a lot of negative feedback. He's not figuring out, what the other kids are going to do, and he's not quite sure how to adapt himself. For Kayla, she's struggling because she wants to connect, but she's struggling getting her body in a place where she can get to the people within her environment. And then physically, we're going to say, okay, we recognize that there's a connection between what's happening physically for both Kayla and Brian. Cognitively, if the challenge is processing, right? And we had pointed out with Brian, he really had some struggles seeing things through somebody else's perspective. So slowing things down and helping him understand what another child might be perceiving through experience rather than through top-down approaches. And then the communication piece, right? How is this child communicating? What's going on with them? Are they able to organize their ideas and share them with somebody else? Medically, as we said, that frequently there's children who have medical challenges, and then behaviorally, that's what we see, right? That's what we see on the top. So we take all of those pieces and we bring them all together and we say, okay, but why is what we're seeing happening? And then all of these perspectives work together to help us to come up with new assumptions.
Jennifer, would you like to join us?
Sure.
So just thinking about, do you have an example of maybe a behavioral challenge that you've experienced as a mom, that maybe now looking at all of these components, sensory, emotional, physical, cognitive, or maybe a story that somebody has shared with you?
I'm trying to think what. Well, I know that, well, okay, so how young do we want to go here? One of the things that was really hard when she was really little is that car rides were awful.
Mm.
Like a lot of babies and little kids love car rides, but for her it was torture.
Okay. So there's a lot that goes. So the behavior is she's crying,
Mhm.
right? So what are a couple things that you could do to address that behavior?
Um, you mean just to address the behavior?
Just to address the behavior.
I could try to tell her to stop.
You go.
Quiet.
Right. And you know what? I mean, that's realistically, that might be. And that's a good example of what we're going to do, right? As parents, we're not going to be like, oh my gosh, I got to go get therapy. My child is crying in the back seat, right? It's not our first approach. Our first approach is let's try something behavioral. Let's try to, maybe works, right? Maybe distracting, right? Maybe she needs to be distracted and maybe I'll put music on. I'll give a story that I'm actually a little bit embarrassed about now because I didn't realize what we were doing. But when my little one he was colicky and he would scream and scream. We realized when we put the music on really loud and bounced him around that he would actually go to sleep. Well, now that I understand the sensory system, we were putting him in shutdown, right? so ultimately it was like, okay, but we tried a behavioral approach. We tried something and it worked. Ultimately, after time, and I'm sure you discovered with your daughter, there was probably vestibular challenges, right? There's probably some sensory challenges.
Mhm.
A child in a car seat can't actually see, they just feel, right? And especially when the car seat is backwards, right? They can
Yes.
see a few things in front of them, but it's like being on one of those virtual rides in Disney World where, there's something in front of you and it's moving and you're in this other compartment and you're moving and it's supposed to be aligned, but it just doesn't feel right. And, like if you're like me, you get sick to your stomach. But, so when there's a mismatch, between what we're feeling in our body and what we're seeing, then we're going to have a response, right? And that's just a perfect example of let's bring this out to other places now, right? When there's a mismatch with what this child's, your daughter or, anybody else, my son, that's I'm feeling, I should feel this way, but it's feeling this way, right? If I have a slower processing, then the processing isn't matching what's happening in the environment. So now I'm feeling disorganized. Now my stress state is higher. My heart rate is higher. My stomach doesn't feel well, right? So I'm physiologically unavailable to be calm. Therefore, I can't connect.
Mhm.
Right. So when we can address some of that, we can start to modify. We can say, okay, I understand this is tricky for her vestibular system, right? It will have a different approach, maybe. I mean, she still has to go in the car, right? Or we'll at least have a different perspective, as you said before, Jen, right? Just understanding, right? She's not crying to make you mad, right? She's not crying to be a brat, right? Like these are the things that we have to take off the table right away. Right. And this is with any of the behaviors we're going to see, right?
Can I say too, because it also made me like I felt awful, like I couldn't soothe her.
Mm.
And I'm sure a lot of parents might feel the same way because you're trying so hard to soothe your baby or your, young toddler. And but so what I found over time was that it had to be a way that worked for her. It couldn't necessarily be like my natural go-to that I used with my other child. So anyway, go ahead.
Sure.
That's
Go ahead, babe.
oh, I just identify with that so much as a mom and feeling of inadequacy in those moments and what that does to my sense of self when I'm trying to develop someone else's sense of self and how you can get stuck in those patterns
Yeah.
And then the anticipation, and then where my stress state goes, and when
Yeah.
I go, oh gosh, I'm going in the car, or it's time to feed, or whatever it may be.
Yeah.
Oh, it's
And Dr. Porges said last month, because this was such, like, this really stuck with me, that we are both receptors
mm,
of other nervous system states and projectors. So meaning if we're very stressed, it's going to be contagious. And if we try to remain calm, that's also going to be contagious.
That's
beautiful.
so true. Um, as we continue this conversation, I'm going to kind of keep going through our strategies because I really want to make some connections between what we're talking about now with our strategies. As one of the first strategies that we think about is prepping the environment, right? And we had talked about how we can modify that environment based on that child's individual differences, right? And as you had said, Jen, understanding your child really came first, right?
Yeah.
And sometimes that takes, sometimes we can figure this out through our own process of let me try this and let me try that, right? We'll try different things and we'll get to it, but sometimes it does take a team to get to a place where we can really start to say, okay, I didn't even think about her visual system, right? Or I didn't even think about how this felt to her, so recognizing the environment as is a key component of getting that child's to get into a calmer state. And then I always think about, well, with the environment, how much structure they need, right? And when I give the example about Brian, like Brian needed some structure. When Brian didn't have any structure, he was extremely disorganized, right? He needed something, but if I put too much structure, if I put the structure in place, it was, he would either just follow along and say, all right, now I do this, now I do this, now I do this, now I do this, and then just kind of rotely go through the steps, or he would just completely reject it. And then the structures that he could do were the ones that I already knew, like, okay, first we come in, then we do this, then we do that. But then we weren't really developing any skills. We were just going through the rote actions that he knew well. So I always think about that just right amount of structure, where it's not too little, not too much, and how we modify it in the moment, right? And so this step of the wait, when we're waiting, we're really being present, and we're observing, and we're recognizing what it's like to be in that child's shoes at that moment in time, right? So we don't always know, but if we can pay attention and start to say, okay, why is she doing this? What does it feel like for her? What does it feel like for Brian when he, goes to the playground? Then we can start to understand a little bit of what things we need to modify. And then once we've done the waiting, then we decide to join, right? And that joining is very, very particular to the child. And it's particular to the picture that I showed earlier, when we're looking at the child, we're looking at their eyes, and we're looking at their body, and we're looking at their responses to things. So we're going to think to ourselves, all right, I'm gonna sit next to him, and then he's gonna look at me. Okay, all right, I'm good. Or I sit next to him, and then he looks away, or he turns his back to me, right? I've gotten a sign that I need to switch something, right? So, but if he looks at me, then I might be like, oh, and then he might look at me more, and then I might go, oh, and then he might go, oh, right? So now I've got a back and forth going, and now I'm ready to join him because I've used just my voice, right? I've used one strategy of just a sound. But if he looks at me and then I say, hi, Brian, and then he looks back down, I'm like, oh, okay, missed it. So that join is so particular on reading their cues in the moment. But ultimately, when we're joining, we want these things, right? We want to follow their interest.
So for Kayla, what would you do with that car?
So that's a good example, because for Kayla, I might, when she's spinning the wheels, I might just go vroom, vroom, and then have her look up at me. And then, or if I said vroom, and then she looked away, then I might not do that again, right? I might get a second car, and then I might do the same thing. And then I might look at her and then look at her car. So what I'm looking for is this shared joint attention over the object. And we can get that through modifying ourselves, right? So Kayla's got the car. She wants to play with this car. She doesn't care about me, but she cared about the sound, right? She was interested in the sound. And then I remember she was calm when mommy sang to her, right? So singing is rhythmic. And then I thought, oh, let me add some rhythm. Vroom, vroom, vroom. And then she looks at me more. And then I'm like, ooh, I'm in, right? So now we've got a connection. So I've gone from following her interest to now we're connected. So now she's going to drop her car and it's going to be out of her reach. And I might say, go get it, right? I'm working on posture. And I might say, go get the car. And then she looks at me and cries, or just goes and get another car. I missed it, right? Missed the boat. It was too far. It wasn't something she was capable of. Got to go back. All right, got to go back to connecting. And then I might reach and get the car and bring it closer to her a little at a time and go vroom, 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 and just until it's within her reach, and then she can grab it.
So I'm Kayla's parent. I want Kayla playing. I want her communicating. I want her engaging with other children on the playground, just like Brian. But you're sitting there playing cars and going brum brum. How is playing actually going to get her there?
So, you know what? And we have this conversation all the time, because parents will sometimes, that parents who have not been trained, and we have training as part of our model, because parents who haven't been trained in understanding all of the developmental steps will sometimes say exactly that, right? You're just playing. I need you to meet these goals, right? And we think about all of our children come in with these top-down goals, right? So Kayla, her goal, mom said, this is really important to me that I have her playing with other children at the playground, right? So then we have to help, first of all, ask the parents, well, why is she not playing with the other children at the playground? And then I might say, mom, why is she not playing with the other children at the playground? And mom might say, oh, you know what? Every time she gets up, she falls down. And then the kids run past and she kind of reaches, but she falls back down. And I'd say, oh, okay. So is she struggling with coordinating her body and her movements? And her mom would recognize that, yeah, she's having some trouble with that. So then I might say, okay, well, you know, what is it? What does she do when somebody comes and sits next to her? Oh, well, she looks up at them. She wants to play with them. Okay, so this is that just right challenge. Right? Somebody's sitting up in front of her just right, and she can look at them and she'll engage. So this is where we are now. This is what comes next, right? Going and playing with the other children on the playground, we have to think about the iceberg and all of those things that are happening underneath. Kayla's calm when somebody's in front of her and singing a song. Now that she's calm, we've got her connected. Now that she's connected, she can access the thinking part of her brain and to be able to say, this is what I want, right? She has her ideas start to emerge.
I'll just add that that's also another good example of other kids meeting each other halfway and not just doing it one way, but actually, you know, how do we both contribute and work together so that we can have a relationship?
Absolutely right. It's definitely, and getting the other kids on the playground to recognize, well, this is, look how happy she is when you're here, right? And then you're having that back and forth relationship, but it is a relationship, right? It's not,
yeah.
I need you to do this, right? That's not
yeah.
what's promote the development.
Yeah. And that just, it made me think too, that like, that's the difference between fitting in and belonging.
Yeah.
That, you're accepted for who you are, and people are making an effort to be with you, just like they're asking you to make an effort, to be with them.
Yeah,
so I love that.
Yeah, no, I love that. And we were thinking about like specifically like building, right? And how do we get that child, once you've connected and they feel like a sense of belonging, then you can help expand, right? But if the child doesn't have a strong sense of self, and they don't know their place in the relationship, it's really hard to add any challenges, right? So we can add a challenge once they feel safe and connected. And, again, going back to that circle, that the child is in the middle, and we expect all of these things to be in place before we can, put these expectations on them. So then we're like, okay, how do we build? How do we present a problem? And, we expect, like I did with Kayla, when the car was too far from her, I presented the problem. That I didn't present the problem presented itself. The car was too far from her. But then I thought, oh, maybe you could get it. Can you get the car? Right. And if I say it like that, I might get a little bit more than if go get the car, right? Then I'm going to get a different response. But if I say, oh, can you get the car? And she looks over and does nothing, then I've just said, okay, she doesn't feel like she's quite ready. But how do I build? So I moved the car closer and closer until she reached and got it. Now I built, right? I did that next step by modifying the environment and myself, and until the just right challenge came closer to her. She grabbed the car, brought it to herself, felt the sense of success, achieved that, and then we did it together, right? And it wasn't something, okay, you got the car, and so. And then is there any other examples on the builds that we want to? Just the just right challenge, I think, is super
Promoting the independence.
For sure, right. And that's, again, so it's instead of, and this is what a lot of other people will do, is they'll go to that next level and they'll be like, okay, here's your car. You wanted the car, say car, and then they give you. So now I haven't done anything that promotes independence. I've just told them what I wanted them to do. But if I give them the car and they've just grabbed it again, then I haven't really helped her feel a sense of accomplishment. So that promoting independence really comes from supporting them to the level that they can take the next step and complete something. I think about, like, even dressing, like, if I'm putting on, if I'm asking a child to put their socks on, right? And every time I ask them to put their socks on, they're like, no, I'm not putting my socks on. It's too hard, right? So, and then I go and I get it all set up, and, I bring it up to their foot, and they lift their foot towards the sock, right? So I've just promoted some independence by waiting and letting their foot come towards that sock. Now I did the next step, right? I put the sock over their foot, and I put it maybe even over their heel, and then I kind of paused, and then they reach down and pull it all the way up. Now we've just promoted a sense of self, sense of independence. I can do this. And then they're ready to take on the next challenge because they're feeling more self-confident. If we go back to that other scale where, I don't know what I have control over. I know I have control over some things when you help me, right? So now we've done this together and we've achieved something together. And now we've got the connectedness. Now I'm gonna try really hard because I'm connected with you. So the last part of that lovely cycle is just the reflecting piece, right? And we really do want to make sure that we hold on to this. And, we think about our clinical reasoning and we communicate that to our families that we work with, is what worked really well in our session? What was challenging? What was too challenging? Where did we see, the most connection? Where did we see the child feeling most successful? And those are the times that we want to, kind of hold on to that. And then, and I'm just going to I throw this out here so that anybody who wants to connect with us, but I think we should have had a question and answer slide that comes before this. So I think we're going to just stop here and be ready to answer some questions that may have come up. Do you want me to stop sharing so we could just all be on the screen together?
Joe? You can leave it up if you want, since it has your contact info.
Okay.
Oh, that's a great idea. Thank you.
Sure. So if anyone has questions, please feel free to ask. I'll actually start. So can you tell us more about how families can access this type of therapy, and anything you might be able to tell people about insurance or things like that would be great.
Yeah, yeah.
So exciting right now, right?
So Medicaid is now approved DIR as a service for children who are diagnosed with autism, for anybody 21 or under. So if your child has a diagnosis with autism, no longer do you only have the option of ABA, but the state has recognized that that developmental approaches are an effective evidence-based approach, and that families should have access to this service. This is huge. As a clinician who has practiced DIR for years and recognized that it's only been accessible to families that were willing to pay out of pocket, many families had no idea that it was even an option. And so it was frequently the families who had access to more knowledge, access to different professionals, gone to continuing ed, and because it's kind of like this secret even now that it's been approved. And that's why we're so thankful that you guys have had us on this program, to have the opportunity to share, because even as we meet with physicians, developmental pediatricians, people in the community, so many people,
yeah.
aware.
It's so no, and it's not just Medicaid as well. We are also in network with commercial providers now too, so it's growing.
Wow, that's great. And when I sent this out, like, we always send out notices to people when we're doing webinars. And I did have someone, kind of ask me more like, what is DIR? So is there anything else you would like people to know? I mean, obviously you gave a great depth of knowledge here, but is there anything else that you want people to know about this approach? I know it's a very broad question.
I don't know, Faith, you want to take that one?
No worries. So DIR, I know it comes up, but what's DIR? What are all these acronyms? Our families have so many acronyms. We have so many acronyms in our lives. But it's really a positive developmental approach to supporting individuals.
So it stands for developmental individual relationship, right?
Individual differences, relationship based. Yes. It's very exciting that it's finally here and accessible to our families. Natalie, anything?
So the developmental piece is really the part that I think people get confused about, because they're like, of course we're following a developmental sequence.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why we really wanted to kind of let it unfold through the presentation. Hopefully we've answered some questions, hopefully, but understanding that development, it happens in a sequence, but it doesn't necessarily naturally happen. And that individual differences is really the most important piece. That's the middle, the individual differences, that if we don't address those individual differences, development does get derailed, and it's hard to get it back on track. Right. And whatever that might look like. And again, that relationship based is not just about the relationship, but it's also about the priorities for that family. And I think that, recognizing that every family is very different, and every family has different priorities. Some families are very structured, and they're like, okay, 9:05, we're getting in the car and we're going to to school, and and they have this specific routine. And other families are much more playful. So for some families, DIR is much more natural, because it is more of a playful approach. But regardless, all families want to connect, right? All families want to feel, they want to get a response from their child, right? So often we have families coming into us and saying, my child just doesn't pay attention to me, or my child doesn't take interest in me, or I don't know how to play with my child. Right. So those are the things that we really want to support families through, and saying, you know what, that your child does want to connect with you, but there's individual differences. There's individual differences within the parents, and
Mhm.
there's individual differences within the child, right? And understanding that this is a dyad and it's a relationship, and that, we do have to recognize that. We don't necessarily say, okay, well, I don't like loud noises and you're very loud, so you need to stop being loud, right? But just recognizing loud is hard for me, and oh, you are so excited and you get really loud. I think, so recognizing that sometimes relationships are tricky because we have different individual differences, right? And,
Yeah.
so when they all go together.
Yeah. I think one thing I think is important for people to know also is, so, when you were talking about the iceberg earlier, because so many people, if their child is having challenging behaviors, and I'll again say that that is a caregiver complaint, it's not the actual cause. And it's not that it's not valid, it's just that, that's not the root problem, like we were discussing before. Medical professionals or whoever in their life will say, well, you need to go get ABA. And so they don't, like, developmental whole child approaches don't really even seem to come on the radar for people when they think of like behavior issues. So I think, like, just I'd like to remind people that that iceberg is very important, and that is what everyone needs to consider when we're seeing a child who is struggling, because it's never as simple as it seems, and that child has legitimate reasons for responding. They are adapting to a difference that they have or a need that they have in that moment and trying to communicate distress, and so they need us to figure out what that is and then help them with it. Okay, we do have a question from Paula Kaprzinski, who just says, do you have courses online?
We don't. We are not an education source. We, for any of the parents that come through positive development and are receiving therapies, then we do have parent training as part of our intervention. But otherwise, the organizations that do the DIR training, there's Perfectum, which I know you've had Monica and Serena on your show before, and they have. I'm Perfectum trained, and then there's ICTL, who is Faith has received her training from ICTL.
Okay, yeah. So both of those websites, I know at least Perfectum has a whole parent toolbox.
Yes.
And they also have courses for clinicians and parents. Does ICTL also have those types of trainings? Do you know?
Yes. They don't have the parent toolbox is Perfectum.
Okay.
Your parent can sign up and it's totally free and you can utilize that resource. It's an amazing resource. But ICDL as well has parent courses and clinician courses.
Okay, awesome. Let's see. Okay, so she said, I did the DIR formation already.
Awesome.
That's great.
Awesome.
So any final thoughts that you would want to leave us with?
I think that, anybody who's listening, just to recognize that the DIR approach is not only that it's accepted by insurance now, and it's, we're getting the word out there, but we really, really do need advocates, in across the country, right? And in the state of New Jersey right now. I mean, the fact that it's been approved is only step one. If we don't have families aware of it, then they're not going to be able to access it, right? They're not even going to know to ask for it. So I think that anybody who's going to their pediatrician or their developmental pediatrician for an evaluation to do some educating. We do have flyers on our website that, that talk, that summarize the research and that talk about, the developmental model and how, it can support a child with autism. So right, like for me, that would be my biggest request, right? That would be like if you could do anything walking away from this presentation, share the knowledge, share the information that, this is available to families. It truly did change my life. Just a little backstory, my son is now 28, was a behavioral problem for many of years. It was a lot of other people's problem, not his. And it wasn't until he went to a DIR school that, all of our lives really changed. And, he got the support he needed. He went to college. He's got his bachelor's degree. He works at, actually, he's getting his sub certificate now to be able to work as a substitute teacher in the school that he works at. So, I mean, I have to say, I'm extremely proud of him, but at the same time, this wouldn't have happened if we weren't exposed to the DIR model.
Yeah, that's great. Last thing I'll say is that Paula says, I'm from Brazil, loved your talk today. And that DIR is very new there, but it must be growing. So, well, thank you so much to both of you for joining us today and to everyone for watching. And the replay is available anytime. And we will see you all soon.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.